We've got some interest in this hearing from members off the committee, and as long as space allows for it, I'd like to include them on the dais. I remind folks that non-committee members are only recognized for questions after all committee members have been recognized. So without objection, Mr. Posey, Mr. Bishop, and Dr. Griffiths would be allowed to participate if they so choose, and we welcome them here. Mr. Posey is or rather Mr. Bishop is an alumnus of this committee, so we welcome you back. And we're also, we all know that Ralph Hall is in a time machine anyway. He doesn't get any older, but if you think he's reversed, he hasn't. He couldn't be here today, and we're glad that Mr. Olson could take his place as the ranking member on the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee. He's certainly well qualified to handle these chores today. So good morning and welcome, Administrator Bolden. Today's hearing marks the beginning of this committee's review of NASA's fiscal year 2011 budget request, including the proposed changes to the nation's human spaceflight plans. As you know, NASA is an agency that occupies an important place in the nation's R&D infrastructure, as well as being a source of inspiration and pride for all of our citizens. I know that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle want to make sure that we do all we can to ensure its future health and productivity. In that regard, I am pleased that the President's FY 2011 NASA budget request has a number of positive features. First, of course, is the fact that the budget request will increase NASA's 5-year funding by a total of $6 billion over last year's out-year funding plan. It's less than many supporters of NASA believe is justified or needed, but in a fiscal environment in which many federal agencies and programs are facing funding squeeze, it represents a vote of confidence in NASA, and that should not be ignored. There are other good things in the proposed NASA budget. It recognizes the critical role of NASA's Earth Science Program and climate research play in increasing our understanding of climate change and other phenomena that impact our society. It moves to restore some of the purchasing power that was lost by NASA's Earth Science Program over the past decade. Aeronautics is another area that gets a needed boost in the FY 2011 NASA budget request. It's hard to think of another NASA program that has had more of an impact on our economic competitiveness, national security, and quality of life, and I'm pleased that its importance is recognized in this budget proposal. In addition, the budget recognizes the importance in investing in long-term technology development for both aeronautics and space, a view long shared by this committee. And finally, this budget also makes provisions for extending the operation of the International Space Station beyond 2015, as well as providing funds to allow for an orderly completion of the Space Shuttle's flight manifest, two very constructive steps. All of these initiatives that I have described are ones that I think could garner bipartisan support on this committee and in the House at large. They are certainly consistent with last year's NASA Authorization Act. However, there are other features of this request that haven't gained much support. Namely, this budget proposal represents a radical change from the approach to human spaceflight and exploration that has been authorized and funded by the successive Congresses over the past 5 years. This new approach is not clearly traceable to either past legislation or past policy directives. It has raised as many questions as it has answered. Administrator Bolden, as you know, many folks in your own agency do not appear to have known what was in the budget request until the very weekend before its release. In addition, it has taken almost a month for Congress to get NASA's budget justification documents, a state of affairs that is not and should not be an acceptable way of doing business with regard to such an important national endeavor. This hearing is intended to help us understand the rationale for such a substantial change in direction from the approach of previous authorizations. In that regard, Administrator Bolden, there are a number of questions that I hope you will be able to address. For example, a feature of this proposal, and one that has not garnered much support on the Hill, is a plan to rely on as yet to be developed commercial crew transportation systems with no government backup system. Leaving aside the issue of safety for the moment, do you have concrete evidence that you can provide us that shows that there will be sufficient non-NASA commercial crew transportation markets to keep these companies viable, or is NASA going to be on the hook to do whatever it takes to keep them in business, since NASA will have no other means of getting into orbit? That is, will NASA's action make these companies too important to fail? Despite the lack of any significant existing markets for their proposed services, with all the implications for the American taxpayer inherent in that phrase. In addition, in this budget request, you are requesting a 62% increase over what the government and the companies had previously said would be needed to help the two would-be commercial cargo transportation companies develop their systems. Systems that are arguably much less challenging than the commercial crew transportation system that you would now want to support. Given the large cost increase, how much confidence should we have in the cost estimates for commercial crew contained in this budget request? I could go on to ask about other aspects of the human spaceflight proposal, but I've already taken enough time, or enough of the committee's time. It is clear that the administration's human spaceflight proposals have profound implications for the workforce, for our position in the world, and for the future of the space program, and we're going to take a hard look at them. Again, I want to welcome you to today's hearing, and now I want to yield to another Texan, Mr. Olson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I want to make a very public statement that I realize that I'm a poor substitute for the wit and wisdom of our ranking member, Ralph Hall. But he couldn't be here today, and he asked that I read his opening statement. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to do so. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you on the important issues facing NASA. And thank you for holding today's hearing on the fiscal year 2011 budget proposal. Thanks to your leadership, NASA is benefiting from the guidance provided in the NASA Authorization Act of 2008. I also want to welcome the NASA Administrator, General Bolden, to his first appearance before our committee. We look forward to hearing the details of the administration's proposals. NASA's fiscal year 2011 proposal is a radical departure from the consensus that emerged after the Columbia accident. In fact, the national debate after the accident helped clarify many of the guiding principles and goals that were endorsed by both Republicans and Democrats in subsequent NASA authorizations. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board clearly warned us about the inherent risk of human spaceflight program that does not have vigorous and engaged national leadership. The CABE also stressed the importance of working towards established goals, not flexible paths, and warned against unbounded technology development programs that, lacking clear requirements and metrics, are likely to fall prey to future budget reductions. As a mission-driven organization, NASA performs best with clear goals and destinations. I'm deeply troubled about the future viability of America's human spaceflight program. On the eve of completing the International Space Station and retiring the Space Shuttle, I cannot understand how the administration can propose such an ill-conceived decision to cancel the Constellation program without providing a compelling alternative plan with measurable goals and adequate resources. This budget proposal, relying as heavily as it does on the unproven capabilities of a nascent commercial space industry, contains very few details. At worst, I'm afraid that its reliance on commercial is unfolded, and as a consequence, it not only threatens our leadership in space and our utilization of the International Space Station, but it also risks the loss of much of our aerospace industrial base and our highly skilled workforce. I'm also bothered by the apparent diminution of crew safety in this request. Except for vague assurances that safety will not be undermined, I see no detail explaining how NASA plans to ensure that commercial systems will be equal to the expectations that guided the development of the Constellation. Until we in Congress have had a chance to examine the details of NASA's proposal and develop the appropriate legislation, I hope you will adhere to the intent of the appropriators, which is to continue the Constellation development in fiscal year 2010. General Bolden, I appreciate the fact that you accept responsibility for the poor way this budget was publicly rolled out. And I want you to take a message back to those who played an active role in its unveiling that such an exercise is ultimately counterproductive. This committee has been the most ardent supporter of NASA in the House, and yet senior agency and administration officials have managed to surprise, frustrate, and anger those of us who've been your greatest advocates. I thought it was particularly troubling that senior people within the administration and on your staff engaged in a campaign of telephone calls with reporters prior to the budget rollout to explain the embargoed program details instead of providing briefings to this committee. This is not a media campaign. NASA should be communicating with its policy and oversight committees, and I encourage you to carry that message back to the administration suite and to the administration. Mr. Chairman, I care deeply about NASA, and I want to ensure that the safety of the crews we send into space. I want to ensure that we can maintain and utilize the International Space Station. I want NASA to have clearly defined goals because I believe that is the only way we will make any progress. NASA is a mission-driven organization that produces its best results with clearly defined goals and the resources to achieve them. I believe NASA's priorities are misplaced. With the retirement of the Space Shuttle and a plan to cancel the Constellation program, it's more important than ever that we work together to provide NASA with the legislative guidance it needs. I know you share many of my concerns. I look forward to working close with you, and I hope you will make room in our busy schedule to hold the necessary hearings to ensure we give NASA the guidance it needs. Yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our only witness today, Mr. Charles Bolden, who is the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Welcome, Mr. Bolden. As our witnesses or witness should know, any additional statement other than your written statement or spoken statement will be made a part of the record. And with that, we will then follow with questions from our members at 5 minutes. So, Mr. Bolden, you may proceed.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss the President's 2011 budget request for NASA. I'm grateful for the support and guidance this committee and I look forward to working with you on enactment of the President's bold new direction for our agency. I want to say up front that I understand the committee's concerns that details such as our justification documents have been slow to reach you. I apologize and ask your continued patience as we finalize the details of this historic change in NASA's direction. Since the introduction of the budget, many have asked what the destination is for human spaceflight beyond low Earth orbit under the President's plan. NASA's exploration efforts will focus not just on our moon, but also on near-Earth asteroids, strategic deep space zones called Lagrange points, and the planet Mars and its moons. For me, the ultimate destination in our solar system at present is Mars. While we cannot provide a date certain for the first human visit, with Mars as a key long-term destination, we can identify missing capabilities needed for such a mission and use this to help define many of the goals for our emerging technology development. The right investments in technology will allow us to map out a realistic path to this destination that continues to inspire generations of school children, just as it inspired me years ago growing up in Columbia, South Carolina, and watching Buck Rogers go to Mars with ease each week from my seat in the balcony of the Carolina Theater in Columbia. The President's fiscal year 2011 budget request for NASA is $19 billion, including an increase of $276 million over the enacted 2010 level. Longer term, I am pleased that the budget commits an increased investment of $6 billion in NASA science, aeronautics, and enabling technologies over the next 5 years, compared with last year's plan. All of us at NASA appreciate the President making NASA such a high priority at a time when the budget realities dictate reductions and freezes for other worthwhile programs. With the President's new vision, the NASA budget will invest much more heavily on technology R&D than recent NASA budgets. This will foster new technological approaches, standards, and capabilities that are critical to enable next-generation spaceflight, Earth sensing, and aeronautics capabilities. These investments will produce additional opportunities for U.S. industry and spur new businesses, such as a recently announced partnership between NASA and General Motors to build an advanced dexterous humanoid robot we call R2. I want to share a few highlights about NASA's bold new path to become an engine of innovation with an ambitious new space program that includes and inspires people around the world. Under this program, the United States will pursue a more sustainable and affordable approach to human space exploration through the development of transformative technologies and systems. We will encourage the development of commercial human spaceflight vehicles to access low Earth orbit. We will develop new technologies that will enable more efficient U.S. human exploration into the solar system than is currently conceived. As the Constellation program is ended in an orderly manner, I want to thank all of the NASA employees and contractors who have worked so hard on that program. Their commitment has brought great value to the agency and to our nation, and they will continue to play a pivotal role in NASA's future path. Many of the things NASA has learned from the Constellation program will be critical as the agency moves forward. More specifically, in fiscal year 2011, NASA will undertake a flagship technology development and demonstration program with our international partners, commercial and other government entities, to demonstrate critical technologies such as in-orbit propellant storage and transfer, inflatable modules, autonomous automated rendezvous and docking, and closed-loop life support systems. Heavy lift research and development that will investigate a broad scope of R&D activities to support new space vehicle propulsion technologies. Robotic precursor missions to multiple destinations in the solar system in support of future human exploration, including missions to Mars, the Moon, Mars and its moons, Lagrange points, and nearby asteroids. Significant investments for the development of commercial crew and further cargo capabilities. Extension of the lifetime of the International Space Station to 2020 or beyond in concert with our international partners. Pursuit of cross-cutting space technology capabilities led by the newly established Office of the Chief Technologist to spawn game-changing innovations to make space travel more affordable and more sustainable. Climate change and observations, which will enable NASA to substantially accelerate and expand its Earth science capabilities, including a replacement for the Orbiting Carbon Observatory. Aeronautics R&D, including critical areas of next-generation air transportation system, or next-gen, green aviation and safe integration of unmanned aircraft systems into national airspace. Education initiatives, including the recently announced Summer of Innovation pilot program to inspire middle school students. Americans and people worldwide have turned to NASA for inspiration throughout our history. Our work gives people an opportunity to imagine what is barely possible, and we at NASA get to turn those dreams into real achievements for all mankind through the missions we execute. This budget gives NASA a roadmap to even more historic achievements as it spurs innovation, employs Americans in exciting jobs, and engages people around the world. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for your support and that of this committee. I would be pleased to respond to any questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you, sir. At this point, we will begin our first round of questions, and the chairman recognizes himself for 5 minutes. You've laid out an exciting agenda for NASA. Certainly, there are many other areas that NASA encourages outside of the human exploration, and I'm glad that you have really a bold agenda there. But the questions that have been raised most often have been about the exploration program. So let me go back to my original opening statement when I asked, or sort of pointed out, as we're going through a too-big-to-fail trauma right now for the taxpayers and the economy, my concern is that we could get into a too important to fail. So if the companies that are going to provide the commercial crew transportation don't have other markets, then are we going to wind up having to support them? So can you give me some type of concrete evidence that there'll be other markets for their services?
Mr. Chairman, the evidence that I have used has been the studies that have come from industry themselves, from the commercial market. Unfortunately, it's not. NASA has not done any market surveys, nor have I offered to do that or asked to do it. So I'm depending upon surveys and information that has come from the industry themselves.
Well, and I don't say that they're bad folks, but this is a little bit like the fox looking after the hen house, isn't it? I mean, if you're getting information from them that justifies themselves, I would encourage you to or I think certainly NASA needs to look into this. I think it would make it a much more comfortable situation for many of us if we thought they weren't going to be wards of the state or of NASA. And so let me just say that's not a satisfactory answer, and we would hope that you could get us some more information. And in that regard, in the request, your budget request, you asked for a 62% increase on what the government had, what the companies had previously said would be necessary. Where did this increase come from?
Mr. Chairman, when we priced what we were going to ask for in the budget for the commercial, the COTS program and other commercial endeavors, we looked at past cost for programs. We looked at what industry estimates for programs, and we asked several of the companies what they thought it would cost for a program of this nature, and that's where the cost estimates come.
Well, didn't just recently, within the last year or two, the companies said that they could do this for less, and which is the result of the 62% increase?
Sir, let me go. I will get an answer for you for the record for that, because there have been some companies who have come in within the last few months that said they could do it quicker. I am not aware of any that have said they could do it for less. So I will get you an answer for the record for that.
Well, where this is going is part of the reason that the justification for moving from Constellation to a different approach is expense. And so if it's not going to be less expensive, then there has to be a better explanation, I think, why this move. And so finally, Administrator Bolden, there appears to be some confusion among individuals at your agency as to whether money from the Constellation program needs to be set aside this fiscal year to avoid violating the Anti-Deficiency Act. So to make certain that we are all on the same page, I wonder if you would agree that the following is the current situation. In 2010, Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriation Act explicitly instructed NASA, and I quote, that none of these funds provided herein shall be available for the termination or elimination of any program, project, or activity of the architecture of the Constellation program, nor shall such funds be available to create or initiate new program, project, or activity unless such program termination, elimination, creation, or initiation is provided in subsequent appropriation acts. Is that a fair? I mean, is that your understanding?
That is my understanding, Mr. Chairman, and in fact, that is I think a letter that I sent recently to 27 members of the House who questioned what we were doing with the Constellation program. As I told them, we were in compliance with the direction of the 2010 Appropriations Act, and that I have directed no cancellations or terminations, and that we intended to comply with the law.
Well, so then could you explain the letters that NASA is sending to the Constellation contractors? I have one example here in which NASA is asking for estimates of the termination liability costs for this quarter, as well as the next 3 quarters. This seems to indicate that NASA is contemplating canceling Constellation contracts in the very near term. In fact, this letter, which was sent out on February the 22nd, asked for a response by March the 5th, next Friday.
Sir, and that was covered in the letter that I did send in responding to the members of Congress. What I tried to explain was that I think it is fiscally responsible on my part and expedient that I try to get estimates from the companies as to what they feel their termination costs would be if, in fact, the President's direction that we cancel the Constellation program in 2011 were to take effect. It is a planning figure for us, and it is not direction to do anything. I asked them to make sure that we can see their numbers for what it would be to fund termination.
But wouldn't it be more appropriate to ask for the termination cost in 2011 rather than cancellation cost of this quarter?
Mr. Chairman, let me go back and double check for the record, but I think I was asking for what would be the termination cost if the President's direction were carried out that we cancel the program.
Well, again, the letter that we have indicates that they start with this quarter. Please provide your estimate termination liability for the subject contract as a part of this in each of the 3 quarters as of April the 1st, 2010, July the 1st, 2010, October the 1st, 2010, January the 1st, 2011. And this went over the signature of Terrell Cochran.
Yes, sir.
I think I don't want to abuse my time, and so, Mr. Olson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Bolden, for your appearance here today before this committee. Always good to have someone from the home turf, Clear Lake, here in this hearing room. Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Administrator, I've got a couple concerns and questions I'd like to ask you. One of them is sort of the process with which this decision was made. Because if you read some media reports and hear some things in the community, it seemed to be made by a very small cabal, for lack of a better term, of people here in Washington, D.C. I know for a fact that no one at the Johnson Space Center was consulted about the decision to terminate the Constellation. And I particularly want to make sure that you were involved in that decision. So I ask you, I mean, this is the largest cut in the President's budget. Did you hear directly from the President on this? And again, this is important to me. I got to go back home and explain to my constituents who, and many of them, in their cases, unfortunately, losing their jobs. I got to explain this to them. And I can't just say this was an OMB call or it was a pre-decisional with no details. So please, could you enlighten me a little bit about the process and the people who are involved in making this decision?
Congressman, I think you're aware that I cannot discuss the pre-decisional discussions that we had, but I can tell you that the President's decision with this, as with everything, are iterative in the process. And I was a member of those who advised the President in the formulation of his budget. So I am the one that represented NASA in providing information and counsel to the President in arriving at this budget. And once that decision was made, it became my budget. So it is my budget.
Yes, sir. I greatly appreciate it. Again, it's very important to me that you were included in that because you are the head of NASA. And as I told you, representing the Johnson Space Center, you've lived there. You live there still. The greatest, well, I'm not going to get in trouble with my colleagues here, but, well, the home of human manned space flight. And, we've got it. Nobody there had any idea what happened. They picked up and read the paper like I did on February 1st, Monday morning. And
Congressman, I can assure you, once again, as I said, it was an iterative process. Every time I requested a meeting with anybody else involved, I got it. I met with the President personally. So this is my budget, and it results from the consultation that I contributed to the President's decision.
Appreciate that. Further question for you, sir. I'd like to refer you to the report of the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, their report from 2009. And let me read a quote from the report. It states, "To abandon the Ares 1 as a baseline vehicle for an alternative without demonstrated capability nor proven superiority, or even the equivalent, is unwise and probably not cost-effective." As you know,
yes, sir. I understand.
Your name is on this report.
My name is in that because I used to be a member of the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel.
You betcha. But given this new budget, I want to ask you now, do you disavow all this, part of this, or none of it?
So I don't disavow any of it. I support and I respect the opinions offered by the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. I consider them valuable counsel. I consult with Vice Admiral Dyer frequently because I know that we will sometimes have differences of opinion, but he is a much wiser person than I because he's older than I am. But I do not take issue with anything that they presented. It is just that in the process of decision making, sometimes we agree to disagree.
Appreciate that, sir. And just to follow up again on one of the chairman's comments, what's the backup if the commercial companies fail to deliver? I mean, or go bankrupt, or somehow can't perform? How do we protect the taxpayer dollars from those situations?
Congressman, the backup is actually puts us in a better situation than we would have been with Constellation. If we had gone through with the Constellation program, we would have one system. We would have one vehicle for going to low Earth orbit, and that was going to be Ares 1. We would have had one vehicle to go beyond low Earth orbit. That would have been Ares 5. As it is right now, I have two companies that are bidding on or competing to handle access to low Earth orbit. I am hopeful that both of them will be successful. We are also intending to go out and reopen the competition to see if we can add even more companies into the mix. So conceivably, there could be multiple companies that we recognize as having met the safety criteria for what we want to do, and then we are much better off than we would have been with a NASA design and built system in a single Ares 1.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Administrator. I'm sorry to cut you off. Got a little bit of time here, and I want to ask one more question or make sure you're aware of a situation that I'm hearing about back home. There was a statement made by a very senior political appointee in the NASA front office, Mr. Alan Ladwig. It's been reported on Twitter, and here's what he said, quote, "For those who fuss over President Obama's budget for NASA, I have two words, bite me," end quote. Bite me. I mean, that's one hell of a message to send to thousands of loyal NASA employees and contractors who've given their life to human spaceflight. And, you know, according to our committee staff here, I mean, this outrageous statement was made while he was in a speech, while he was overseas for an audience in Strasbourg, France. And I think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure. Is this NASA's budget message to the American people and to our international partners? Bite me?
Congressman, I was not aware of any statement of that nature, and I think you know that I would never tolerate that. And I would, rather than make any comment about it without, finding out its validity, I would just say that is unacceptable.
I appreciate those comments. We'll get you the information you need because, again...
Oh, I will get the information.
That's Marine Corps General I love. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'll back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Mr. Costello is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Administrator Bolden, thank you for being here today, and I thank the Chairman for calling this hearing. Administrator Bolden, I have major concerns as well about the administration's plan to terminate the Constellation program. As you know, we have invested over $9 billion over the last 4 years in this program. My concerns are many. They involve cost of this action, not only in terms of cost in terms of money, but also what the action will do to weaken our science and engineering workforce here in the United States. The loss of jobs and how it will affect our economy. The loss of my concerns about safety as to how it will affect the safety of our those who participate in the program, and also the impact on national security. As you know, the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and China have all been, their space programs have all been government-funded programs. If, in fact, the private sector could create a successful space program, I think they would have done so by now, either here in the United States or elsewhere. So these are a few of my concerns. I happen to agree with Senator Bill Nelson. I don't think that we can do this on the cheap. And in fact, I think we could point to many programs in the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and other agencies of the federal government where we have outsourced functions that used to be the function of the federal government, and it, in fact, has cost the taxpayers more when we look at the cost overruns and some of the other issues that we have dealt with both in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other contractors that have been hired to perform government functions. So I want you to take that back to the administration. They're going to hear that not only from me, they're going to hear it from, I think, the appropriators and others. So I have major concerns with going down this path. I do have a couple of questions. My other hat is chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee of Transportation concerning two issues, one next-gen, and the other issue is we just held a hearing yesterday on icing. As you know, we've had a number of, one commercial tragedy concerning icing about 13 years ago, and a number in general aviation issues. So my concern is that we've seen over the past few years a decline in funding since fiscal year 2005. I wonder if will aircraft icing on the side of R&D, which of course involves NASA, be a priority for NASA in fiscal year 2011?
Congressman, I can assure you that when you look at icing and other issues that have not been funded before, the Glenn Research Center is the home of the largest icing simulation facility that we have. One of the things that we're also going to increase spending on is research into rotary wing issues. Rotary wing also has a problem with icing, but even more importantly, we're beginning to look at issues of noise pollution. So we're looking for quieter rotor blades, so that the increase in the aeronautics budget will enable us to do much more than we have been doing in the past. You mentioned NextGen. We are actually increasing the spending that we are putting forward on NextGen because we really believe in it. We think it's critical for the nation. One of the biggest champions of NextGen right now is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Janet Napolitano. In an executive committee meeting on NextGen that I attended with her, she was the #1 spokesperson, saying that if we didn't bring this program online very soon, that she was going to be in trouble, because NextGen is going to enable us to get people from the curbside safely in the air to their destinations, back to their baggage, and back home. And it's critical that we do that. So we are increasing the amount of money that we're going to spend on the next generation air transportation system.
We heard testimony yesterday concerning the icing hearing that enough research, some research has been done, but maybe not enough coming from NASA. So I would just ask you to make it a priority. We need to do rulemaking and to move forward so that we can make certain that pilots who are not only on the ground but in the air, that they have adequate information concerning icing, training, and know what to do when they get into icing conditions, not only when they leave the ground but in the air. Also, on my final question is about NextGen. Do you believe that you have adequate funds to move forward with the next generation air traffic control system in this fiscal year budget proposal?
Congressman, there are never enough funds to do what I want to do with NextGen. You know, some of it is, if you gave me all the money in the world, I couldn't get you there any quicker because of technological issues that we face. Some of the problems with NextGen don't have anything to do with funding at all on the part of NASA. They have to do with getting buy-in from the business and the general aviation community, because they are a huge portion of the airspace users, and pricing of the equipment needed for the heart and soul of the NextGen system is something that we see resistance from the business and general aviation communities, because they contend that the commercial guys don't have to worry about it. They just raise the price of a ticket. I'm not sure that that's true, but that's their contention. So I am confident that we have sufficient funds for this year and the out years to help us bring into play those systems that are necessary for NextGen. We will have to continue working, though, with the various segments of the user communities to see that we get them to buy the equipment that will be necessary to make the system effective.
Finally, let me make the point that the Joint Planning and Development Organization, JPDO, as you know it, NASA is very involved with them. I would encourage you to continue to make certain that you cooperate closely, because the only way this is going to get done is through a cooperative effort with all of the federal agencies involved.
Sir, and I guarantee you we'll do that. Even before coming to this job, when I served on an advisory council for the FAA Administrator, then I observed that NASA was a very strong member of the NextGen team, and since I've arrived as the administrator, I've put extra emphasis on it. So I think you can be guaranteed that we're going to continue to push as hard as we can for the delivery of this system.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Robacher is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me identify myself with the remarks of my colleague concerning air traffic control and icing type of research. I think that quite often that job that NASA has not got the focus, and people don't get the PR and the publicity that human spaceflight gets, but those are vitally important to the safety and security of the American people, and that's your job. In general, welcome aboard. It is pleasant to hear that you do accept criticism, and I appreciate the fact that you have.
I'm married.
There you go.
And I have been for 42 years.
Well, some people have some people get up here and they get a little bit
To the same wife, by the way.
Good for you. God bless you. But some people I don't acknowledge criticism, or they just feel uncomfortable with it. You met that head on, where you've been criticized that your people briefed journalists before they briefed members of Congress who are on the Committee of Jurisdiction. I'm glad to hear that you have taken that seriously, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. Let me just note that NASA can't do everything. And if we are going to do these things like we just mentioned, air traffic control and research into icing to help protect people, we can't have programs that have $9 billion that are behind schedule, way behind schedule, and over budget, and just ignore it and let it go on until you end up with a $50 billion program that is behind schedule and over budget and may not be able to reach its goals. Sometimes you have to make decisions. And I'll just have to say that I appreciate the fact that this administration and that you, as leader in this area, have decided to make some decisions. It fits with a Marine general, I might add. You were in the Marines?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I am a Marine.
You know, my dad was a lieutenant colonel in the Marines, and he would just roll over in his grave if he didn't think that I was calling you general and sir and the rest of it. But congratulations, General, for making decisions. In the Marines, they say the worst decision is no decision.
No decision. Yes, sir.
And I think that you should proceed in the rest of your responsibilities with that in mind. Let me just note at some of the criticism that I hear of the decision that's been made here in Constellation, that the primary consideration behind that criticism seems to be not safety and not necessarily human spaceflight, because we're talking about human spaceflight, but being accomplished in a different way, but instead in maintaining NASA's workforce. Now, maintaining NASA's workforce, just to maintain the workforce, is an expensive proposition. And if maintaining a workforce that is not meeting its responsibilities, not on time, not doing things on schedule, not getting us to a place where we're going to accomplish specific missions, then that workforce is holding America back. And I can see, whether it was a space shuttle program or many other programs that I've been witnessing here in the last 20 years, that maintaining the NASA workforce becomes a goal in and of itself. We've got to break ourselves from that type of thinking, or we're not going to be the leading power in space, and we should be. I happen to believe that some of the criticism I've heard just totally disregards the fact that we've got private sector companies that have invested a lot of money in space and been very successful, and we have the Atlas program. We have the Delta systems. I mean, these are very, very efficient and effective space transportation systems. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it your plan, your proposal, to, instead of going to this Constellation, which, as you say, would have put all our eggs in one basket, isn't it to expand upon private sector and diversified sources to meet our obligations in low Earth orbit and delivering supplies and people to the space station?
Congressman, that would be our hope, and you have pointed out something that we probably have not done a very good job of getting to the public and to the members of the Congress. Commercial, the way I define commercial, it is the aerospace industry.
Sure.
Some people define commercial as entrepreneurial, and they think that that's the only people that we're talking about here.
We're talking about Boeing and Lockheed.
When we started out,
yeah.
When we started out with, and it started before my administration, actually Administrator Griffin was the one that began the COTS program. When they started out, the only bidders happened to be entrepreneurial firms or smaller firms, and again, it's because the larger firms chose not to bid. We are going to open another round of bidding, And it is my hope that we will have some of the more experienced aerospace companies who will decide that they too want to bid on,
We need
cargo
to
and humans
General,
to low
my
Earth
time's
orbit.
about up. Let me just say that we need to encourage large companies, Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop, and the rest of these companies. We need to encourage them to be more entrepreneurial, and we need them, and that, I believe that's part of your plan. And but we also need to encourage those entrepreneurs who may become big companies in the future. And we want to wish them success, but I don't believe that the criticism that's saying that the decision being made has put us at risk of not having a human space flight capability for the United States of America. I don't believe that's justified. I don't believe that it places the type of faith in big companies like Boeing and Lockheed, who have developed many technologies in the aerospace. In the history of aerospace, they've done tremendous work, and we should be concerned about that rather than focused on maintaining the NASA workforce and read that NASA bureaucracy. So thank you very much, and looking forward to working with you, General.
Mr. Wu is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Administrator Bolden, for your service to our nation as a Marine, as an astronaut, and now as Administrator of NASA, where I believe that you continue to be a good, loyal soldier and doing your job as best you know how. Let me express my concern about the possible downside effects of this administration's decision. We are optimists by nature, and especially those technologists who work in space. So the administration has on its side the rhetoric of the market and private sector and competition. The administration will, at least initially, have the benefit of technologists who look optimistically to the future. I think it's incumbent upon those of us who, at least for some time, have seen the political sector work to be concerned about the potential downside analysis of what happens after a few years if this administration's proposal is accepted by this Congress. We have a Constellation program which is not working out in an ideal way, but it is a public program funded in the ways that every human spaceflight program thus far has been funded, because achieving Earth orbit is fundamentally different from the ballistic ventures that private companies have been able to do, at least at the very beginning. The problem is that right now we're terminating or proposing to terminate Ares 1 because it's over cost. Now, we can discuss the flawed technology all that we want, but it is what we are committed to. And now we're going to put all our eggs in the private sector basket, and there are basically three contractors right now. It's Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and SpaceX. And they have the Atlas, the Delta IV, and a proposed Falcon 9. It looks good right now to privatize, but this is the easy part. This is just the privatization step. In 3, 4, 5 years, maybe 5 or 6 years, when we really hit the hard part of getting those launch vehicles human-rated, I suspect that we might have some of the same cost problems that public launch vehicles have had and that Ares 1 has. And if we do, it seems to me that the way Washington, D.C. and the public decision-making process works is that we will then terminate the commercial spaceflight program because of exorbitant costs given to us by the private sector, just as the public sector has run into cost problems. The cost problems are to be anticipated. If you can cite a single satellite program that has come in on budget, I'd be very interested to hear about that. So space, the costs go up because it's hard. And NASA's job is to do the hard things. I think one of the fundamental flaws of Ares was the decision to do something that was off the shelf, because NASA should be in the business of making new technology and pushing our economy and pushing and pushing the envelope. Computer science wouldn't be where it is without NASA's push for better ways to do things in the 1960s. I think that material science made a lot of progress because of the 1970s and the space shuttle, and our experience in putting astronauts in place for a longer period of time has paid great benefits. These are benefits to the American people. These are benefits to the human race. If my sort of downside analysis works out, what's at stake? What's fundamentally at stake is whether future generations of astronauts speak English or speak Chinese. And in case there's any doubt, I'm an advocate that at least English be the lead language in human space flight. I was against privatization in the Bush administration. I'm against privatization in the Obama administration. I think that y'all are running a huge risk, and I don't want to see human space flight, at least by Americans in the 17-nation consortium, which is counting on us to be tubed and to have human space flight go to the Chinese or to the Indians. And Mr. Chairman, let me just take one moment to express my concern. I got a call from a Canadian reporter. About this topic, and I thought, golly, I expected a call from a Florida reporter. I don't expect calls from Oregon reporters because, you know, our connection with space are the astronauts that I bring for space camp announcements, scholarship announcements every spring. But the Canadian made it really clear that if we don't fly, Canadians don't fly. And this is true of a number of other nations. They're depending on us. The American public is depending on us. We have failed in the mission of pushing technology with the current Ares 1. But that is something we can fix. And if we privatize this, we're still going to need a labor force. And if you think that we're going to be able to afford 3 separate contractors for human space flight, I would like to see your business plan. I would like to see, my apologies, not yours. I would like to see the administration's business plan because, you know, there's the business of lifting satellites up. But I don't think there's a workable business plan for lifting humans up into low Earth orbit. At least, you know, from my business, it just doesn't look like it pencils out. And that's why we subsidize it with tax dollars. And we can either do it directly to NASA or we can give the money to Boeing, to Lockheed Martin, or to SpaceX. And I just want to note that to date, they haven't launched a human being. We talk about airlines in space. Well, when we encouraged airlines after World War II, that was the right time. If we had encouraged airlines in 1910, before World War I, it would have been significantly premature. And I would encourage the administration and your agency to consider whether this is premature, whether this is wise, and whether this dooms us to a future where there are no Americans in space, or at least that the dominant language in space is not English.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. And the unopposed Mr. McCall is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll allow you to answer. I'm going to echo my colleague, Mr. Wu and Mr. Olson. Like Mr. Olson, my district, I have many NASA employees and contractors at the Johnson Space Center. You know, that since the inception of NASA, the mission has always been human spaceflight. You know, President Kennedy talked about landing a man on the moon, bring him safely back to the Earth. President Johnson carried that vision on. The goal was met. And I'm concerned about the mission changing. I'm concerned about the human spaceflight mission being completely cut out of this budget, the Constellation program going away, and an increase in funding towards something that I don't consider to be a core mission of NASA, and that is climate change and weather observation. It seems to me we're getting away from the core mission of NASA. We're getting away from the national security aspects that NASA has always played, that we know was vitally important to our space race against the Soviets back in the 60s. I think, as Mr. Wu mentioned, the language, I hope it does continue to be English, but I think the Chinese and Russians could overtake us. I don't, commercial space developers, I don't believe are at the point where they can take over this program. We've already we've invested $9 billion in the Constellation program. It'll take another $2.5 billion to terminate. That's $11.5 billion invested in the Constellation program, and now we're just pulling the rug out from underneath that program. I think we're sending a message in terms of the mission that it is not a positive one, and that is human spaceflight is not the priority anymore, but rather climate change and weather observation. I know you spent a lot of time at the Johnson Space Center, and I really respect your service, and thank you for your service as administrator. But I find it hard to believe that you actually agreed with the President's decision here. Now, I know you have to carry out his orders. You're in the chain of command, but I question whether you do agree with this, having the experience you've had at the Johnson Space Center. So if you would just care to comment to me on, and I know you won't be able to answer, maybe you can, whether you really do agree with this decision.
I can answer.
And how possibly commercial space developers can pick up the slack, particularly after we've invested so much money in the Constellation program.
Congressman, I do agree with the decision. I think it's possible, and in fact, I will try not to take too much time, but I will take some of us back to the 1980s when I first came into the astronaut office. We had not long flown STS-1, 2, and 3. We had gotten into the space shuttle program, and it became apparent to us that if NASA continued to try to operate the shuttle, that's all we were going to do. And we actually started looking for commercial entities that would be willing to come in and take over operations of the shuttle, much the same as we are trying to do today with the new commercial program. And there were companies like United Airlines, Lockheed, Boeing, American Airlines that all were going to bid on the operations contract for the space shuttle, to offload that. We even participated in providing training manuals to them for crews and the like, and then something happened called Challenger. And in 1986, January of 1986, when we lost the Challenger, all efforts at outsourcing, if you will, because that's what it would have been at the time, outsourcing the operation of the shuttle went away. The Air Force was going to take over the responsibility for conducting classified missions, which NASA, some of you will remember, NASA flew all of the human classified missions up until 1986. January of 1986, January 28th, 1986, the world changed. President Reagan decided that it was not smart to put satellites on the space shuttle. You know, they did not feel it was worth the risk to put an astronaut and a satellite in the same vehicle, and we stopped deploying satellites. So the world changed on January 28th, 1986, and things that we are trying to do today, we were trying to do then. And I think they would have been successful had it not been for the Challenger accident. And I don't make light of anything, but I tell people all the time, the trauma of the loss of Challenger to this nation and the world, we are still suffering.
And General, with all due, I got 15 seconds. I want to throw this last question out at you, and that is, I think NASA, the program, has been one of the best investments of federal dollars that we've had. A model of success, the return on investment. What are we to tell our constituents? What are we to tell the people at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, Clear Lake, the people that you know so well, Mr. Olson and myself, when we go back home, what impact is this going to have on them?
So the Johnson Space Center, as well as the other NASA centers, we are going to do everything in our power to ensure that the programs that develop from this budget, that we are able to develop from this budget, from the increased money that we're going to have, are going to enable them to continue to do the type of work that they do. There is always going to be need for engineering effort. There is always going to be a need for development, and we are. You know, I wish I could give you definitive programs that we are going to have now, but we're 2 weeks, 3 weeks after the rollout of the budget, and we have not gotten those types of answers. But I promise you that within months, because I have asked for studies to be brought to me to help us determine which programs we're going to do. within months, we'll be able to put some meat on the bones, if you will, because I realize there is a lack of detail, and that's disturbing to everybody. It's disquieting and discomforting to me, but we're gonna get some answers for you. We'll have some programs defined.
Well, I think you're going to find there's going to be a lot of opposition to Congress to the Constellation program. Mr. Chairman, I hope we can work together in the Congress on this issue. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, Mr. McCollum. We want to continue to talk through this in a fair, reasonable way and better understand will this new program work? Why do you make the changes? There's more discussion that needs to occur. And to continue that discussion, the chair of our subcommittee on space and aviation, Ms. Gifford, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, General Bolden. There are many members here that don't have as much time with you, so I'm going to try to keep my statement as pretty brief as possible and just wrap up with a question at the end. On the positive side, there was a lot about the President's budget that we can be excited about. Unfortunately, our country has underfunded science, underfunded the investment into research that we all know is really important, those of us who sit on this committee. And I think it was interesting to see in the President's budget proposal that there was a variety of funding streams that we're frankly really excited about. As you've heard from my colleagues and you will continue to hear, there are serious concerns about the President's decision to decimate our American human spaceflight program. By canceling the program of record, we trade a program that we know will work, although it has experienced delays, and part of those delays, unfortunately, came from drastic underfunding. But it's a program that has been deemed as the safest program to take our astronauts back to lower Earth orbit and then back to the Moon, Mars, or wherever we choose to explore. My concern when considering the space program and the future is not one pet project over another, one state over another, one facility over another, one plan, one aerospace company over another. It's truly how do we best and most prudently use the taxpayers' dollars to achieve this great desire that we as humans and members of Congress as well have to explore. We want to get outside of lower Earth's orbit. We want to really challenge the way that we understand science and space, and we want to move forward. You're going to have a lot of questions that our subcommittee, Mr. Olson and I and members of our subcommittee are going to be grappling with as we move forward with writing the authorization plan. Some of the things you're going to hear about, of course, is the workforce, and Mr. Rohrbacher is no longer here, but you look at the tens of thousands of direct jobs that are going to be impacted with the sunsetting of Shuttle and with the planned termination of Constellation. But in fact, hundreds of thousands of highly skilled jobs through subcontractors and indirect industries will be impacted if these decisions move forward as well. And we're going to be working to flush out those numbers so that every member of Congress understands the impact to their employers and to their constituents. We're also going to delve farther into what's going to be happening with the production of the solid rocket motors. I mean, the decline in this industry when looking at our acquisition of strategic missiles is something of great concern. And I serve on the House Armed Services Committee, and as I understand, Secretary Gates was not consulted and was not aware of the plan to terminate Constellation, which has a direct impact on our nation's security. We're also going to be delving into international competitiveness. A few months ago, we had a hearing with a variety of experts. We heard from Mr. Hauser of Space Foundation, who had recently returned from visiting, and I quote him here. He says, in this past September, a delegation led by the Space Foundation visited China and toured a number of previously secret space facilities. It was a stunning experience. Not only are China's facilities newer than ours, they are state-of-art and in some ways downright luxurious compared to ours. So as China continues to invest heavily, as the Russians continue to be steadfast in their commitment, and as we see other countries show an interest, I'm very concerned, and other members as well, of what is going to happen with U.S. dominance in an area that we think is so important. So my question to you, knowing that these other questions are out there and we will continue to gather the information as we write our authorization bill, is we're pretty surprised here in the United States Congress about this decision to terminate a program that the American people and members of Congress have invested tremendously in, not just for the last couple of years and the last 10, 11, $12 billion in Constellation, but for 50 years, in fact. So can you please talk, General Bolden, about who was consulted, how you went about this decision, who did you reach out to, who did you bring in to make a radical decision like this to terminate our United States human spaceflight program?
Madam Congresswoman, I can explain that I brought in all of my senior leaders. From the time that I became the administrator, we had strategic planning meetings dealing with the fact that I was going to have to make a recommendation to the President. So we met for months to formulate a position that I took. I consulted with the President, and as far as what the discussion was, again, I have to go back to the fact that it's all pre-decisional, and I'm not at liberty to share that. But I played an integral part in the decision that the President made, and once that decision was made, then the budget became mine. So this is my program. It's my budget, and I can't say that too many times. I wish I could blame it on somebody else if somebody needs to take the blame. But I played an integral part in the iterative process that arrived at the President's decision on where we're going. And I do agree with him.
Well, Mr. Chairman, General Bolden, certainly we understand as NASA Administrator that this is your plan. I'm trying to make sure that that everyone understands that, at least speaking for myself, that I very much want to see NASA successful and I want to see the President successful. But that means the United States of America to be successful. And proposing a decimation of the most exciting project or program that the United States does without consulting with members, without talking to the defense industry, without really building a coalition to make such a radical shift is hard to stomach. And it's just something that we're going to have to work through because there's deep, deep concern among the subcommittee members, Democrats and Republicans. I mean, this is a very strong bipartisan concern that we have with what was proposed by the President. And we want to work with you. We want to work with the President. But some of these, what you're proposing in a 4-page draft memo is just it's too great of a shift to really not have those details when presented to us in the Congress. So, Mr. Chairman, we're going to be working to get that information, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Chair Griffords. Before we proceed, let me just make a quick announcement to our friends that are visiting on the committee now. Our rules require that we always try to alternate back and forth, but since there are more on the majority side here, they need to go through first, and then we will be happy to let you participate any way you would like. And so Ms. Fudge is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Bolden. It's nice to see you again. Mr. Bolden, just in my opinion, the lack of a clear mission with goals and milestones fails to not only inspire the current NASA workforce, but also fails to inspire the future generation of scientists and astronauts, something that is so critical at this point in American history. When we are talking about the need for more students to be excited about careers in STEM fields, having no light at the end of the tunnel, be it on Mars or the Moon, we will not serve our country well at this time. Just last week, I was at JFK High School in my district where I was talking to a young ROTC student. I asked him what he wanted to be, and he said an astronaut. I had no clue what to say to him at that point. I wanted to say to him, find something else to do because the chances of becoming an astronaut or a rocket scientist are approaching zero because NASA is canceling its human spaceflight plan. I'm confident that NASA Glenn can play a significant role in the technology development programs you've described and look forward to learning about Glenn's part in the new programs. But clearly, these are important priorities that support the mission of NASA, but the idea of technology development alone without a corresponding flight plan may not be sustainable. We've seen this before in NASA's recent history. In 2003, Project Prometheus was a technology development program to create nuclear power and propulsion technologies. Then NASA Administrator Mr. O'Keefe stated that the objective of the program was to hone technologies that would allow the agency to fly any number of destinations that are possible, which sounds quite similar to what we are hearing today. After 2 years and $464 million, Project Prometheus was canceled due to a shifting of agency priorities and a top-line budget number that squeezed out many other programs. Technology development programs are always vulnerable when not tied to a specific flight program. How can we be sure that these technology development initiatives will not meet the same fate, especially with no independent assessment of the end cost of supporting commercial crew transport development? If these cost estimates rise, how can we know these technology development programs will not be sacrificed as they have in the past?
Congresswoman, let me just quote something from the Augustine Committee report, the concluding observations, and for those of you who have it or have seen it, it's on page 111. And I found it interesting because Norm Augustine and I talked about this extensively during the course of the program. He said, planning a human spaceflight program should start with agreement about the goals to be accomplished by the program. That is, agreement about its raison d'etre, not about which objective in space to visit. Too often in the past, planning the human spaceflight program has begun with where rather than why. Norm and I talked extensively about it because, as I did in the strategic planning sessions with my leadership, I said, if we don't know why we're doing this, we may as well quit. My question to them was, why do humans need to go to space? We do need a destination. That destination ultimately is Mars. But we need to know why we're going there. We're going there because the human species is incredibly inquisitive. We think that there is potential for life on Mars, or at least potential for people to be able to live there at some time, much more than any other planet in our solar system. So that's the why that we came up with. But in direct answer to your question, I was glad you did not tell the student not to think about being an astronaut. I would have told, and I assume it was a middle school student, high school?
High school.
I would have told him forget it for a while. I always do, and I would have told him go back and study and make sure you graduate from high school, go to college, and then get an undergraduate technical degree, as Congresswoman Edwards will probably tell you. I always tell him. So I'm glad you did not tell him not.
But I really want you to get to, we've done something like this in the past. Because the cost became absorbent, we just shifted and said we're not going to do it anymore. Can you guarantee me that's not going to happen now?
I can't guarantee you, but I can tell you that I am confident that the program that we are laying out, based on the budget that we have, will support and sustain our ability to get not only to low Earth orbit, to continue to get to low Earth orbit, but to go beyond low Earth orbit with a program, once we develop a heavy lift launch vehicle that will get us to Mars, get us to the moon, get us to asteroids. It's critical that we do all these things. While Mars is the ultimate goal, asteroids are pretty important too, because they threaten the planet, and unless I know what they're made of, whether they're dirt or whether they're iron, I don't know what to advise the President on how to protect the planet from them. So I can see one day when astronauts go to asteroids, because we don't understand them a lot. We were all awakened when Hubble gave us an image of the planet Jupiter late last year with this big black hole in it. A hole that was the size of several diameters of Earth. That was a wake-up call. So there are a lot of reasons that we need to send humans to space that are different from what they were September of last year. We learn something new every day about why we need to be exploring space. And the program that we have now, particularly because we have sufficiently funding research and development, makes it different from when we were trying to do Prometheus. We were probably down to zero in the money that NASA sent to colleges and universities around the country for technical research and development. I think you'll agree with that. Wilberforce or any other college in your area probably got nothing from NASA for research and development. This budget allows us to start putting money back on college campuses so that kids will be excited about wanting to go study with a professor who is working on a research project for NASA. That wouldn't happen last year. So things are different, and that's why I'm confident that this is going to work.
But again, you can't tell me that in another year or two or three, we may just change and shift gears again.
Congresswoman, I can't tell you, in our system of government, there are good things about our system of government, and there is one horrible thing about our system of government, and that is it changes every 4 years, and with it, ideas change. And so I can't guarantee that President Obama, if he is reelected, or the new president, if he's not reelected, will have the same vision that the president presently has. I can tell you that as long as President Obama is sitting where he is and I'm sitting where I am, we are focused on increasing the research and development that is done in industry and academia. We are focused on getting kids to the point where they become proficient in STEM courses, so that we don't lose the battle of intellect to the Chinese or the Russians or the Indians or anyone else. We have a shared vision, and I, people tell me I don't know what the president wants to do. I do know what the president wants to do. I have sat with him. I know how much STEM education, how important it is to him, and how much inspiring kids is to him. And we did not frivolously arrive at this budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Bolden. And Ms. Edwards is recognized.
Thank you, Administrator Bolden, for your testimony today and for being here. I want to say, I, like many of my colleagues, have just been floored by this proposal. And I think part of the reason is jumping off the point where you ended about inspiration. I think one of the things that inspires young people to get engaged in science, to be interested in space, is the inspiration that's actually been created really through the human spaceflight program. And so I'm struggling trying to figure out how in this budget we derive that inspiration for the future. But I want to go to some specific details. One is, I could be really concerned, not as concerned about this budget, because truth be told, Goddard Space Flight Center, which is in my in the county in which I live, and a lot of the folks who work at Goddard are my constituents. And you know what? We win big in this budget. But the fact of the matter is that this is really about a vision for our space program, and our space program is a three-legged stool. It's the earth sciences in which we engage, it's the research and development and technology development, but it's also human exploration. And I feel that with this budget, we lose one of those legs of that stool. And so I want to ask you actually about the commercial sector. And I'll just quote for a minute from Anatoly Permanov, of the head of the Russian Space Agency, and he says, I quote, "We have an agreement until 2012 that Russia will be responsible for this, about ferrying astronauts from other countries into low Earth orbit. But after that, excuse me, but the prices should be absolutely different then." What is it about it in terms of the administration and your confidence in the commercial sector that enables you to believe that after 2012 we will have a robust commercial sector that's really able to deliver on its promises? Because if you look at what's been expended to date, I want to know what hardware has been delivered from the $618 million that's gone out, what services have been provided, what does NASA own, where are the intellectual property rights, and what's actually been tested and worked to give us that kind of confidence that after 2012 we won't just be floating more and more money into this, having lost $9 and then $3 billion, $12 billion out of where we've been. I really don't get it. And I would say lastly that just in terms of risk, the commercial sector is never going to absorb the kind of risk that it really takes to get these vehicles off the ground. And at the end of the day, the taxpayer will always have to absorb that risk. And if that's true, then why not really take it on by continuing to have NASA fully engaged in human space flight? Because when it's all said and done, it's going to be on us anyway. And I want to correct for the record Mr. Rohrbacher, because the reality is that the job loss that we're talking about in this workforce is a private sector workforce. It's a technical, skilled, scientifically capable workforce that is a private sector workforce. This isn't just about retaining government jobs. Thank you.
Congresswoman, I think you asked me a question, and I'm going to try to remember it and answer it for you. However, I want to thank you for the comment in response to Congressman Rohrbacher's, because he didn't ask me a question, so I didn't get a chance to comment on it. It is more than just jobs. We're talking about people who have incredible qualifications and capabilities. And so I share everyone's concern about the workforce, about retaining the workforce. I've had conversations with some of you. It is my intent that this budget will allow us to try to find ways to cross-train our people, to help bring them into the 21st century workforce, where a person who can turn a wrench or hammer a nail or whatever else it is. There are very few jobs like that in the space industry anymore, and we've got to transition the workforce. We were going to see a bucket in terms of job losses at the termination of the shuttle program. We knew that. What has kind of thrown us a curveball is that a number of those people, not all of them, were going to have gone to the Constellation program. We are working feverishly now, and we'll be working over the coming months to come up with follow-on programs that are going to replace the Constellation program to ensure that we can get humans beyond low Earth orbit, to ensure that we maintain the ability to get humans into low Earth orbit by American-manufactured rockets. And we're going to do that.
But, Mr. Bolden, what gives you the confidence in this program, given that they're already behind schedule, they're already under budget, and they haven't delivered anything yet?
I have not. I mean, you have information I don't have, Congresswoman. We have milestones for orbital and for SpaceX to meet. And to date, I have not been informed that anyone has missed a milestone. We are as far as I know, SpaceX, because I visited their Launch Complex 40 facility and looked at their rocket and talked to their engineers 2 weeks ago when I was down for the STS-130 launch, and they were very optimistic that they're going to launch here in a month or so, their first flight. Now, they don't launch for us until 2011. We will be their third flight, so they have milestones that they have to meet, and until they fail to meet a milestone, I can't say that they're behind. We pay them based on their meeting milestones. And so far, we have not failed to pay them because they have not failed to meet a milestone. Orbital is a very proven company when it comes to putting things in space. Putting people in space is a new deal for them. Boeing, Lockheed, USA, ATK, these are all well-established companies, and they have an opportunity to bid in the next round for commercial, for an opportunity to be a part of the commercial space program. And what makes me confident that it's going to work is because these are experienced people who are dedicated to what they do, to human spaceflight. As I told the employees at Marshall, they're being unfair when they criticize companies like SpaceX and Orbital and others, because some of the people who are doing the jobs now were their former coworkers. We are not talking about hobby shops. We're talking about very professional engineers in these commercial companies.
Thank you,
and I have
Administrator.
faith, that they can do what we ask them to do.
Mr. Grayson's next? Yeah, he just came back. Okay, Mr. Grayson is recognized.
Thank you. What is our next destination for America in space?
The next destination for America in space, and I'm not being trite when I answer this, is the International Space Station. We've got to get there 4 more times this year. The long-term destination, after we successfully close out the space shuttle program, the ultimate destination is Mars. And there are intermediate points that we're going to have to get to before we are capable of going to Mars. If you gave me all the money in the federal budget today, I could not get a human to Mars. I could not morally put a human in a spacecraft and launch them on an 8-month mission to Mars because I do not understand the radiation
All right,
environment.
so what is our next destination in space?
The next ultimate destination is
No,
Mars.
the next one.
Congressman, the next destination, as I said before, is the International Space Station. And
All
we've
right,
got to
let's
do that
not
4
be
more times.
trite then. What is the one after that?
It's Mars.
So there's nothing in between as far as you're concerned.
But there are intermediate stops
What
on
are
the way
they?
there.
What's the next one?
The moon is a destination. Lagrange points are destinations.
Which one is next?
You mean where do we go immediately next? Is that the question?
That's what next
Incrementally?
means.
Congressman, we are in the process of developing a program. I will have to be able to give you the details, and I will come back and make it for the record in the coming months.
So why are we even talking about how to get to the next destination? We don't even know what that is.
Congressman, we do know what it is. We know what it
What is it?
Congressman, we can go back and forth forever.
We seem to have to here. I'm looking for an answer.
Okay. The next destination in the Constellation program was the moon. After
about
that, there
now,
was-
since you're planning to
Congressman,
eliminate
the
that?
program of record and the program to which we are working right now, because you have told me that I have to continue to work the Constellation program. We're talking about the 2011 budget, but if you ask me right now, the next destination is the moon.
Okay, good. Now, the Augustine report came up with 4 options and several sub-options or alternatives within the options. Which one did the administration adopt?
The administration adopted the recommendations of the Augustine report, which was
Which
flexible
option?
path. The flexible path.
The flexible path?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you
That
think
was
that...
the recommendation of the Augustine committee.
All right, now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I did read the report, and it seemed to me that the flexible path involved continuing the Constellation program. Is that a fair statement?
The Constellation, the Augustine committee did not recommend cancellation of the Constellation program. That's
So then I'm right.
You're right that they did not recommend cancellation of the Constellation program?
The flexible path included continuation of the Constellation program.
The flexible path did not necessarily include. I think you're cherry picking from the report. The report said.
I just want to know why you had all these people come together, the people who knew the most about the space program, and then you ignored their recommendation to continue the Constellation program. That's
Congressman,
what I'm asking.
they did not recommend continuation of the Constellation program. What
The
they
flexible
said,
path did.
Congressman, what the report said was that they find no technical challenges in the Constellation program that cannot be met the way that NASA has always met them. However, to do so will cost a significant amount more than anyone will reasonably be able to place in a budget.
All right, regarding the budget, it seems to be your plan to put people in space through commercial programs. Is that correct?
I intend to put people into low Earth orbit through commercial programs.
How often has that happened so far?
We do it today.
Explain to me. Go ahead.
Well, today I go out and I pay USA to operate the space shuttle out of the Kennedy Space Center. The vast majority of my workforce right now is, as Congresswoman Edwards mentioned, 89% of the workforce in the shuttle program today are contractors.
So you consider the space shuttle program to be a commercial program?
I consider the space shuttle program to be evidence that commercial entities can successfully operate.
Please answer the question. My time is limited.
Yes.
Okay. So what's wrong with continuing it then?
We would not. I do not think it would be wise to continue the space shuttle program beyond the 4 additional flights that we're on track to fly right now. I think that would not be prudent.
But if one's commercial and the other's commercial, what's the advantage of switching?
The advantage is that we relieve ourselves of the responsibility and the cost for operating and maintaining infrastructure as we do today with the space shuttle program.
Isn't it true that commercial entities have never put a man in orbit? Ever?
Commercial entities have put every human in orbit that the United States has flown. And you can take that up with North American Rockwell or Boeing or the United Space Alliance.
Honestly, I'll tell you, my time is up now, so I'm going to tell you this briefly. I think that what you're doing is taking a shot in the dark. You have no way of knowing if any commercial entity will ever be able to put a man in orbit, no matter how much money you throw at them. What you're doing is you're taking NASA's manned space program and making it a faith-based initiative. I yield the rest of my time.
Ms. Cosmas, thank you for your patience, and you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you, General Bolden. I want to, first of all, thank you for our service, for your service to our country, both in the military and as an astronaut for us. I want to hearken on a comment that was made yesterday by Dr. Holdren, where, to quote him, he wants to ensure that what we do continues America's leadership in space and science, and assume that you would agree that that is a goal worthy of our attention.
That is my intent. That is not a goal. I am determined.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. I want to suggest to you also that inspiring generations is part of the goal, I think, for the future. And I was glad to hear you say that from the balcony of the movie theater in Columbia, South Carolina, to the commander's seat on a shuttle launch into outer space, you had been inspired by the space program and have made led a very inspirational life for all of us, and I'm sure would like others to do it. There are a number of things that I'm extremely concerned about, many of which have already been covered by my colleagues. If I have to identify them in short order, I would say the job loss in my community, as you know, is devastating based on the impending finality of the shuttle program, if that in fact is reality, and the lack of specificity in the budget for what we will be doing next and what skills or knowledge will be required. In the short term, we will be losing a highly skilled and competitive workforce from my community, one which is already suffering from 12% unemployment. We will lose, I believe, the opportunity that was given to you to be inspired by space because we don't have the specificity of the program. I think we are at risk of losing our leadership internationally, as has been not only alluded to, but expressed with great detail by others here today. I think you referred to losing the battle of the intellect to other nations, and I think that's something that is very serious a concern to us without having the inspiration that will provide for the next generation, for the 21st century jobs, the economy, the national security, all of which is contained in inspiring our next generation to move forward in fields related to, obviously, the STEM programs, and nothing does it better than manned space exploration. There is no greater inspiration to those folks sitting around in a room developing something without any idea where it's going to go is not what I would call visionary or inspirational. We've had this discussion previously. I'm also concerned about our actual lack of access to the International Space Station. I'm pleased that we've extended its life for 5 years, but the fact that we have no vehicle to get us there past the 4 shuttle launches planned is of great concern to me. And so in outlining those things that are of specific concern to me, I want to ask you another couple of questions. I think we all agree we want to maintain our access to the space station. There's no way we can actually maximize the additional 5 years unless we can get there. We have, as others have said, we have no proof that there is a commercial opportunity to get there. I have asked before about the possibility of extending the shuttle. I don't want to beat a dead horse, and I'm not looking backward. But if we have extended the life of the space station and the shuttle is the only vehicle that we have currently that is able to take us there for service, for support, for access of a wonderful resource that we have, can you tell me what it would cost us, or can you respond to me about why it is that we have eliminated that as a possibility going forward?
Congresswoman, there are a couple of reasons, and I will be happy to answer in detail for the record, because I don't want to give you, I'm going to give you some numbers that are not precise. It cost us in the neighborhood of $2 billion a year to operate the shuttle. That is a cost that would come out of other programs if we decided to extend it. There is the issue of potentially having to recertify the vehicle,
I
reopen
think that's done on a sort of a
lines.
recurring basis,
Yes,
and so those are things that we probably could discuss. Again, I'll look forward to your response on that. Again, the lack of specificity has been hit on so many times that I'm not going to go there. But I think it's very essential that you provide us greater detail of what the research and development and so forth is going to be for. I know in the budget there is also and we're pleased with this, $2 billion for upgrading the infrastructure. How do we go about being efficient and effective in upgrading infrastructure when we have no idea what the architecture we will be planning for is going to be? And that's a question that's, like I said, that's a thank you for the money, but how are we going to use it effectively if we do not know what the architecture that will support?
We have actually been involved in discussions with the Air Force, particularly the 45th Space Wing, for a number of years about range upgrades that they want to do. And we now have funds that will allow us to do things on our side that will enhance their ability to do the range upgrades.
Okay. Well, I would look forward to having more detail with you about not just what's happening at the 45th, but also at Kennedy Space Center, and how we manage to maximize that for the people of my district who are looking to lose their jobs and add to an already dire situation. So I would look forward to hearing more from you in that regard. I just, and I'm also concerned about the cancellation of contracts, as has been discussed by others, and hope to hear more from you on that. I think there are many of us who feel that Congress should have the opportunity to respond as a body to the budget proposed by the President, and that cancellation of contracts at this stage of the game before Congress has engaged in what our alternative proposals might be is premature and puts my workforce, my highly skilled and professional, valuable workforce, at even greater risk as they were depending upon some of these contracts moving forward during the transition period.
And Congresswoman, I think, hopefully, I was clear when I sent my letter back that we have not directed any contract cancellations, nor is it my intent to do that. I intend to be in full compliance with the law in the form of the 2010
but even canceling
appropriation
to the future of 2011 has the impact of making decisions without Congress having weighed in on your plan.
And our intention is to as I told the chairman before we came in, our intention is to be in full and complete deliberation with you in the coming weeks and months about where we go. Congress will be, you will be an important part of the deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you.
And Ms. Coswell, I think part of your discussion points out to whatever happens needs to be determined soon for certainty. There'll be probably more jobs not lost than will be lost, but if you don't know where you stand in all that, it's very difficult. And so we've got to bring some certainty to this, both for the expertise and the human aspect of it, as well as to get the best program before us. My neighbor from Tennessee is recognized. Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thanks for holding this budget hearing today. I know that the process here is that we would basically, in this committee, authorize certain expenditures as we go through this budget process, and that's the reason a lot of us are here today, and perhaps many have some questions to ask. I will relate to you some experiences, and Bart will probably chastise me for doing this, we often have in rural areas growing up, wherever it may be, in my situation in rural Tennessee. I look at this budget and realize there's $19 billion. It's about a 1.5% increase. But yet we're making a cut to a complete program of Constellation. I know that in the mid-50s, Sputnik kind of startled us. In the early 60s, John Kennedy made a statement that we would send a man to the moon and safely return them within this decade. And on July the 20th, 1969, the world also saw space change because we landed the man on the moon. And I sat at Camp Boxville in Bart Gordon's district near Gallatin with about 25 Boy Scouts, of which I was a scoutmaster of. As we watched that happen, it was unbelievable. And so the world changed then, too, when it came to space. But we made some pretty strong commitments to make that happen. I know that in 1986, as I sat at my house and watched with my teacher wife the Challenger blow up, yes, there's no question that also changed the way we look at space and the dangers of it. But are we again looking at a change that will be as devastating to us as the 1986 accident was, or are we making a decision that will make us another July the 20th, 1969? I don't know which place I fall there. And here's why. When I would go to Tennessee Tech to get a degree where I later became a soil scientist, I would often hitchhike from Cookeville to Pall Mall. There were times people would be going all the way to that area and I could get a good, safe ride there. I want to be certain that we will continue to have space vehicles and a safe space vehicle that will ultimately get us to Mars. I don't want us sitting on the star and the constellations, hitchhiking with China or Russia to arrive at that destination. Because my fear is if we don't head in the right direction, that we will not have a vessel for space flight, and we will have to fly with someone else. And this country can not afford that, nor should we put ourselves in that position. I also realized that one day driving up the mountain where I live, as I reached a higher elevation, I assumed the road was still wet. It was black ice, and I crashed. Are we headed on a collision course as we counsel Constellation and look at private entrepreneurs? And there's no, when we talk about private entrepreneurs, let's make something perfectly clear to everyone in this room. I'll cite a situation in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where 12,000 people work and 400 work for the federal government. The rest work for private entrepreneurs funded by the federal government or the taxpayers. We're still going to be funding at a level, maybe with less direction, from my perspective. So here's the question. 10 years from now, in your perspective as you went through this process, 10 years from now, what percent would you say of completing our objectives could we have with the Constellation program or with the new process that you're taking? Which one has us more certainty? And what percentage could we expect of success with Constellation compared to the steps that you're taking in this new budget?
Congressman, if I go with the report of the Augustine Committee, 10 years from now, we would definitely not be on our way to the moon because that report said that we were sufficiently behind both in terms of progress on completion of the vehicles and everything. So we would not be where I think we may be on the path that we're set in, that's supported by the 2011 budget. It is my hope that by 2015, 2016, we'll have an American capability at work getting humans back to low Earth orbit, to the International Space Station, perhaps more than just one, as we would have had with Ares 1. And it is my hope that the technology development that we do in terms of propulsion will have us physically building on a heavy lift launch vehicle such that sometime between 2020 and 2030 we'll be on our way to destinations beyond low Earth orbit. That's those are wishy-washy answers in terms of the leaving low Earth orbit, but it's too early to tell you a definitive date for when we're going to do that.
You're saying with Constellation program, we probably would not be able to be there for a much longer extended period in the future compared to what your plans are now.
If I remember the program of record, it did not have the International Space Station after 2015 because the cost of extending the International Space Station would push Constellation, Ares 1, and Ares 5 even farther out. The program of record did not have landers, so we would not have we'd have a vehicle to go to the moon, but we'd have no way to get humans to the surface. We would have, we would not get there in the time that you think we would under the existing program. And that is not, please understand, that is not an indictment on the people or the technology in the Constellation program. The Augustine Committee points out very well. They found nothing technically wrong with Constellation any different from any other development program in space. And they felt that NASA, given time and money, could take care of any challenges that they had. And the workforce is absolutely incredible. It is just that we found ourselves so far behind because of insufficient funding over the last 8 or 10 years that to ask the government, to ask you as the Congress to approve a president's budget that would add $7 billion a year to try to catch up the Constellation program, that was irresponsible in my estimation. And so that's one of the reasons for my recommendation to the President that we take the course we're on now.
All of us are visionaries. We can predict the future, but we cannot see the future.
You can't.
And so as we engage in this debate further, I have a concern about canceling this program. And so therefore, until we have more discussions, I will be one advocate of continuing the program that we have. You must convince me that the vision I'm not seeing that you have, that the program you're proposing is better than what we have with Constellation.
So I respect that, and that's exactly what I have to do. I've promised the chairman that we are not prepared at this time, and I apologized at the very outset of the hearing because we do not have the type of detailed program outline that one would normally expect when we were making a change like this, but we are working on it.
And that's what concerns me, and I think many members of this committee.
Ms. Dalkemper is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and General Bolden, thank you for joining us today. There's certainly been a lot of concerns echoed from one member after the other, but I'd like to go back to a little bit of what Representative Fudge was talking about in terms of education, STEM education, inspiring students. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on a few points here. You know, as we look at our youth, you know, we've always used space exploration, shuttle launches to inspire our youth, to encourage them to go into these fields. What is NASA going to tell our youth about what you're doing, what's going on? How can you inspire them at this point?
Congresswoman, we are actually, this summer, we're going to try a program called Summer of Innovation, where we're going to connect youth with NASA centers, with NASA engineers around the country. We are going to let them do hands-on type of operations that may connect them with the International Space Station. In the 2011 budget, we have money that's set aside to do interactive exploration where school children can actually participate with experiments and the like that are on board the International Space Station. Dr. Sally Ride has a program now, and I forget the name of it. I think it's Space Cam, but it allows children today sitting in their classroom to take control of a camera that's on the International Space Station, and they point it wherever they want to point it, and they do projects. And those kinds of programs are going to continue, and we're confident that we can continue them now because the President has put an additional $20 million a year over the next 5 years into my budget. We have put additional money in so that we can pull forward a number of the earth science programs that were in the Earth Science Decadal Survey. So we are accelerating almost all of those Tier 1 programs by a year, and some by as many as 2 years. Those are things that we're going to use to inspire youth.
There's a pilot program this summer, right?
That's I am told not to call it a pilot, but it's a pilot program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a sufficient lead time for NASA to be up and going for summer of 2010 on this program?
Oh yes, ma'am. We've been planning this since last fall, and we've had fits and starts, I will admit. But we plan to have it operational in 5 states that will be selected competitively across the country.
How's that working?
So far, so good.
I mean, how's that going to be determined, the 5 states?
Oh, it's a competitive selection. Mm-hmm. We had a pre-solicitation conference a week ago, and we had 125 participants in the call, and we already have, I think, 27 notices of intent to apply to compete for the program. So that's pretty good.
And what happens this year? How will that be used to determine what you do with the $20 million for the FY11?
The $20 million that's in the budget is for increases in education programs that if I am able to do what I want to do, we want to modify, we want to radically change, if you will, the way that we do education in NASA, where we are now going to be able to provide impact in coordination with the Secretary of Education, who taught me that you shouldn't do anything unless you can provide impact metrics. The data that says you have changed a child's life or you've really had an effect on them. And we're transforming the way we do business in NASA, where we were advised that we're a program and project organization. We know how to do programs and projects, and we were advised that we should do education the same way. And so the Summer of Innovation has a project lead or a project manager, and she is now developing a project plan with a budget, which is unlike programs that we've done in the past in NASA. We have definitive metrics that we will require people to meet. So we are looking to see whether or not we are making middle school teachers more effective in their ability to reach students in the STEM subjects, and we'll be looking at this over a 3-year period of time.
And do you see any downside to the fact that the cancellation of the Constellation program and the shuttle?
You mean with
in terms of
this program?
inspiring? In terms of inspiring,
no, ma'am, I don't, because Constellation would have not had any connection with the Summer of Innovation at all, because the earliest that we would have seen Ares 1 fly, given the current plan that I asked about the other day, would have been 2015, 2016. So we will know whether the Summer of Innovation works or not. We would have known it 2 years prior to the earliest possible flight of any element of Constellation. So Constellation had no impact or will have no impact on the Summer of Innovation or any of the other education programs we have on the books.
In terms of inspiring, as you have this goal out there?
The Summer of Innovation is dependent on what we call NASA content.
Okay.
That is the International Space Station. It's in existence today. It's not a dream.
Okay.
And we are extending it an additional 5 years. So we have 10 more years to utilize that as an asset to support enhanced STEM education. We are going to try to put children aboard the International Space Station what's the right word, through the internet.
Virtually?
Virtually. I apologize for losing my mind.
That's okay.
But we are going to try to put them virtually aboard the International Space Station. We can do that for 5 more years than we were going to be able to do it before, because the President has funded the extension of the International Space Station, or is willing to fund it if the Congress concurs. So
We'll look forward to seeing the progress of this, and my time is up, so I yield.
yes, ma'am.
Mr. Wilson will be our final full committee questioner, and then we'll move to our guest. Mr. Wilson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Administrator Bolden. NASA's economic impact to Ohio exceeds $1.2 billion and acts as a catalyst for over 1,200 aerospace-related companies in our state. These companies that employ more than 100,000 Ohioans are directly related to NASA Glenn. These are good-paying jobs that I would like to see protected regardless of the direction of human space exploration. What specific roles do you foresee NASA Glenn playing in the NASA's future?
Congressman, NASA Glenn has a bright future. If I look at things that are going on or are going to be going on with the 2011 budget, the increase in the Aero budget, much of that will involve Glenn, primarily because they are a research center. As I told one of your fellow members of the committee earlier, we are going to increase the amount of research that we do with rotor wing research. We're going to pick up the pace on icing research. So there are a number of things that Glenn will play a key role.
Good, thank you. Second question. In NASA, Glenn has a prominent role in the Constellation program, including the components of Ares 5 and Lunar Lander. Therefore, are there very real fears if the Constellation program is canceled that NASA Glenn could be negatively impacted?
So I don't, I would encourage you to ask the former Glenn Center Director Woodrow Whitlow. But I think he would tell you that he has no fears that Glenn will falter from lack of the Constellation program prior to my predecessor's desire to make sure that every center in NASA had a piece of the exploration pie so that everybody would have people working effectively. Glenn did not do the type of quote-unquote exploration research that they've been asked to do with Constellation, but they will still be doing exploration work. And most importantly, we will allow them to go back to being focused on aeronautics research as they have done before. One of their greatest contributions today is the engine nacelles on not the engine nozzles on the Boeing 747-800 that has been broadcast recently, where because they use the Chevron system on the engine nozzles, Boeing is realizing an increase in fuel efficiency, a decrease in noise pollution, and a decrease in air pollution. That's a product of Glenn research that was sitting on the shelf that somebody went back and found, and Boeing picked it up. So Glenn does ion engine research for in-space propulsion. They have a bright future.
Good. One last question. The Space Power facility at Plumbrook is a unique facility with the ability to simulate in-space conditions. However, in the fiscal year 2011 budget request, it eliminates the Constellation effort, including the Orion crew vehicle, which was planned to be the first utilization of these new capabilities. The budget has no specific information about the future of Space Power facility. Can you give me some insight about this facility and how it would be used by NASA?
So that facility was sized for Orion and other vehicles in the Constellation program, and when I look at commercial vehicles that are coming down the road or potentially coming down the road, they are all smaller than what we have. So the facility at Glenn, we are hoping we will be able to attract DOD as well as commercial users to that facility. I don't see it being impacted that much by the cancellation of the Constellation program.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I appreciate your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Bishop, you've been here the whole time. We appreciate you coming, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been most interesting. I appreciate you welcoming me back to this committee, and I realize I'm here temporarily since my nameplate is put together with Scotch tape. So thank you very much. General, everyone who has been here so far is thank you for coming. I want to thank you too, but to be very honest, very bold, if if you and Ms. Garver had actually made better decisions, we wouldn't be here talking about this, and both of us would be much happier in that situation. There are some specific questions I'd like to ask. I'll try and be as brief as I can with any of them. It was brought out by Ms. Giffords, but he didn't really speak specifically to this particular issue, that with the Minuteman ground-based missile decisions that were made last year, as well as the canceling of Constellation, it's left the industrial base in shambles. And we obviously know that Secretary Gates was not consulted with this, Secretary Donnelly was not, AFMC was not as well, and if obviously you talked about acquisitions, you obviously didn't listen to what they said. So, sir, did you consult with the Department of Defense on the impact of the industrial base before you made this catastrophic announcement?
Congressman, let me be very careful about how I answer your question. I did not have detailed discussions with anyone in...
Did anyone in your office then have discussions with them? And I need you to be brief, I'm sorry.
I have had informal conversations with senior persons in DOD from the time that I came into office because I wanted to reach out across agencies in the government. So I have talked with members of DOD. I have talked to them about, while not talking specifically about the impact of cancellation of the Constellation program, I asked for information on the impact of to the industrial base, particularly with reference to solid rockets.
Good. With whom did you speak?
Sir, I have. If you ask General Cartwright if I've spoken to him, he will tell you yes, I've spoken to him. But those were not formal meetings, and they were not formal deliberations.
Anyone else, though? Anyone else with whom you had consultations?
Sir, those are. I can go through. I will provide you the information for the record. I will get it to you.
Your comptroller wouldn't do that, so I appreciate if you do that right now. Are you aware of the Department of Defense report to Congress on the solid rocket motor industrial base issue that was addressed last year?
I am not aware of that report. I am aware of a report that Dr. Holdren prepared. I read it.
Not that one. Go back to the original one from acquisitions. I appreciate if you look, especially on page 47, where it says if there is delay in Constellation, has a significant negative impact on the defense side of this equation. Canceling it, has to be a very significant negative impact at the same time.
I will go back and.
Are you currently, because we talked to Secretary Donnelly yesterday, are you currently having discussions with Secretary Donnelly on this issue?
I am not. Since you put it. Me directly. I am not having discussions with anyone right now. There are discussions on the space policy review that is underway, and persons in my organization are participating in those meetings.
Since he said he'd had to get back to me on something on record, would you be willing to talk to him about that?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. Ms. Edwards asked you specifically about the Russians and the cost that would come to this particular program. When the contract currently with the Russians is up and they have the monopoly on spaceflight, which will take place for quite some time, do you have any anticipation, or could you give me any kind of guess of what they will charge us to provide that services for us? Do you have any clue of what that will be?
Sir, we're in negotiations with the Russians right now, and so I would prefer not to. In fact, I won't discuss cost or any progress on that.
Do you have an estimate then on cancellation costs? Your budget puts around $2.5 billion.
We are evaluating right now what the potential cancellation costs are, and
thank you.
We can get that to you for the record, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's consistent with, I think it was Mr. McCall that you said that to. You really don't have a handle on what that cancellation cost would be, which, I hate to admit this, to me is somewhat of a backwards approach. It would be nice for a congressman or somebody who's making policy decisions if we knew what the cost would be before you actually make that decision and jump to the next particular level. Look, I only got about 40 seconds with you, and I apologize for that. There are some other questions. There was a Space News article that came out which seemed to contradict the letter that you sent to us. I hope, for the record, sometime you will clarify whether the Space News was wrong and its implications on whether you're actually closing down programs for record or whether your letter was wrong to us. But I have to say just one last thing. When you said you are building a bold new path for the future, and you're coming up with, what was it, programs, summers of inspiration for kids to encourage them. In all due respect, when you have a president and you who said you want to encourage kids to become involved in science, math, and engineering, or STEM's programs, I have to really admit to you that the summers of inspiration is not going to fool a kid in college or in high school or junior high right now who looks at 20 to 30,000 private sector jobs who are involved in science, math, and engineering being given a pink slip and the kind of chaos that goes to their particular life is not going to encourage anyone else to become involved in this area or any other area. This is a negative impact. It's a negative message. There is certainly no inspiration with this. This is not a program for a bold new path. It's more like managing America's decline. And I'm very much disappointed in the approach that NASA is taking on this particular effort, and I apologize right now. I wish I could give you more time. I only have I've already gone over 33 seconds and counting, and I apologize for that, Mr. Chairman, as well. I tried to get in 5 minutes, but I'm sorry that we have to meet here.
Well, Dr. Griffiths, welcome back, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
General, I appreciate seeing you again, and I know the bipartisanship in this room is heartwarming to you. That's a joke.
That's why I laughed. No one else did.
Okay. Teasing. I do think, though, that you being here, and I must say that, and I certainly disagree, that this, if we were in the business community, this has all the earmarks of a hostile takeover. And unfortunately, your kind face and your experience and the deep, deep respect that we have for you and what you've done for America makes it very difficult for us not to come to you with a smile and a good heart. We are deeply concerned, though, that whether it be SpaceX, a company that is reasonably new on the scene, or whether it be a Boeing or Northrop Grumman or whoever, we realize the difficulty when you pit two private or three private companies in a bidding war for a endeavor that has so much to do with our national defense. We're witnessing a delay right now in our refueling tankers with Boeing and other companies. And suppose we run into that same difficulty and we recognize that China is on its way to the high ground, and we find ourselves in a bidding war or a bidding conflict, or we find ourselves in the legal system that is now slowing down whether these companies can in fact fulfill their mission or even resolve the bidding process, and years pass. We believe, and I think many of the committee members believe, that this is a national security issue, and a national security issue that you privatize without control puts us in danger as a country, because it is the high ground. We are concerned that should a CEO change at Boeing or a CEO change at SpaceX, or a Columbia accident occurs in one of these private companies, they will not be able to survive it. Only the USA can survive that with the will of the American people. We believe deeply in NASA. It's our heart and it's our soul. If we begin to divide our heart and soul with labels that say SpaceX or Boeing, and we have a failure, where will the American people be as far as their willingness to support manned spaceflight? We are greatly concerned about this. The thing that is of great concern to us is one of the things that makes me believe that this is an unfriendly takeover is something that you said, that we'll be happy to involve you in the deliberations as we move forward. But actually the decision to cancel Constellation was done without those deliberations. So we're all very, very suspicious. And so you can, it's great concern to me, of course, because I represent Marshall Spaceflight, but it's not about jobs. The heart and soul of America is NASA. If we do anything to detract from that, we're going to lose. And we really can't afford to lose. We're 5% of the world's population. 95% of the world lives somewhere else. We are number one in manned spaceflight. And if we interrupt this culture of manned spaceflight, if we interrupt these people who are handing down their wisdom from generations of manned spaceflight engineers, we're making a huge mistake. And to privatize this with a SpaceX or a Boeing or a Northrop, getting involved in the legal ramifications of a request for a proposal that may take 2 years, or a bidding process that may be interrupted by the judicial system, we really need to think about this some more. We need to really, really go over it, because America is a difficult place to do business. And I appreciate you. I truly do. But I disagree completely with the decision. And it's not about budget. If the conversation could take place between you and the President, and you said, Mr. President, we need $3 billion a year for the next 5 years to make sure Constellation is on target and on time, and there's $800 billion over here in this stimulus, could you move $3 billion a year over into our space program so that we can be number one and we won't have to watch the Chinese land on the moon from our living rooms? Mr. President, couldn't we do that? Wouldn't that be a good idea? And I'll bet you, with your persuasiveness, the answer would be yes. Good idea, General. Anyway, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Congress.
And Mr. Posey, you're going to close us out today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Following up on Congressman Parker's comments, I know it seems like a big reach, but it would take about 1% of the stimulus funds to fly the shuttle for another 5 years. I had another meeting earlier, so I missed your testimony apparently when you refused to disclose who made the decision to cancel Constellation. I don't want to beat that horse anymore, other than to say I'm deeply disappointed in the alleged most transparent administration in the history of this country not to be able to get a direct answer on that, and a lot of people are. I think everyone shares that same question. When the President was campaigning in my county, he promised that he would close the gap between shuttle and Constellation. And number two, he would keep America first in space. He didn't close the gap. He made the gap eternal. And low Earth orbit sure as not hell is not keeping us first in space. You know it. I know it. He knows, you and I both know it, but it doesn't seem to change anything. The rest of the world knows it too. We have a focus on commercial in the future, and I love commercial spaceflight. I've spent about 20 years trying to help make commercial more profitable. I think there's a huge opportunity for there. If we'd done that earlier, there wouldn't even be a French Ariane today. But the reality is there's no profit in commercial rockets for human exploration unless we pay them. And we should be taking the lead in doing that anyway. I read your statement today, and it has a plethora of subjects that you said you were going to focus on, and then we've heard more about also focusing on education. And I'm just sad to see that the focus of NASA is not what this nation has always presumed it to be, and that is first and foremost human space exploration. I'm chagrined to hear the allegations that the Constellation program is over budget when you know, I know, and they know, we both know, it's underfunded. Russians have already increased the cost of ferrying the astronauts of ours and the other nations we're pledged to ferry back and forth from $30 million to $51 million per. And I just wonder if you would dare to guess what that may be ultimately when we no longer have an alternative like the shuttle to do that. We've not received a NASA workforce transition report since last summer, despite the 2008 legislation that requires it. Apparently, somehow it got sidetracked by Augustine. Given the importance allegedly placed on workforce, you have to wonder why we're looking at laying off thousands of high-skilled workers, and the question is when we can expect to get our next report. If shuttle safety is really a legitimate objection to continuing with the shuttle, the questions that beg for an answer is why we're going to continue launching the ones we have, and aren't they in fact designed, engineered, and built for 100 missions, and I think Endeavor has less than 30 right now. Augustine report also referred to that as one of the most reliable, I think talked about over 98% reliability. Thousands and thousands of space workers are going to be put in the unemployment lines across this country, and I know a lot of the people in my district are wondering exactly how many reductions NASA is going to make at headquarters they're expecting a commensurate amount of reductions as we lay off thousands of people around the country, and I wonder if you would comment on that. And if there's not time to address all these, and it's obvious there won't be, I wonder if you would be kind enough to respond to me in writing to these questions at your earliest convenience. Unfortunately, history will show that unlike the landing of Apollo when there was a giant step for mankind, we're going backwards now. This is a giant step from greatness to mediocrity, anything but extraordinary, I think, in the future. And I think it's just a sad day for America. And the final question I have is, what would it take to get you to consider further renewing your interest in Constellation?
Congressman, I will get you answers for the record for the questions you asked about manpower, particularly that at headquarters. In terms of interest in Constellation, there are aspects of the Constellation program that I want to capture and I want to keep. And some of the studies that I've asked to be done right now are helping us to determine what technologies, what projects that we have in the Constellation program that we cannot do without, and it will serve as a nucleus for emerging programs. If I give you an example, two examples from the Constellation programs of things that we've already found to be needed and are going to be applied. The thermal protection system studies that were done for Constellation determined that there is a thermal protection system that the folk from SpaceX could use, and they have chosen to use that on their vehicle. So we have gained an incredible amount of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge from the Constellation program that I think will carry on to the programs that we develop in the wake of the cancellation of Constellation, if that is the final decision. When we look at escape systems, something that the shuttle does not have, at the Langley Research Center, we did a test on something called MLAS, the MAX launch abort system, which was highly successful. That is a system that we have recommended that the folk at SpaceX take a look at, because they want to use a pusher-type system also. And so rather than have them go out and reinvent the wheel, we've suggested that they look at that product of the Constellation program. So there are a number of aspects of the Constellation program that I would hope we would be able to capture and to use in future programs.
Thank you. Yesterday, we had Dr. Holdren here, and before the meeting started, or the hearing started, Mr. Hall asked me, does he bruise easily? And I will report back to him that you do not bruise easily, and we thank you, Administrator Bolden, for being here. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members and for answers to any of the follow-up questions the committee may ask the witness, and the witness is excused. The hearing is adjourned.
Congressman, thank you very much.